Good morning, Americans. This is your favorite alien and Bubba on Sunday, July 7th, sitting in for Paul Harvey. Today, in a moment, the rest of the story. Well, Americans, this is the Independence Weekend, and it's been quite a weekend where you had all kinds of stuff going on here, including a few earthquakes and, fun stuff there. But there's one story that you don't understand about independence. When the signers signed the Declaration of Independence in 1776 over in Independence Hall, the Second Continental Congress, everybody assumed, and even today, they draw the map when you say the 13 colonies. Yeah, 13 colonies. And they make the border the way it is today, with the 13 states. That was not the border back in 1776. And this is the rest of the story. And it's kind of told, in a certain extent, if you happen to be lucky, and there's few of us that are lucky, to be alumni of a certain school that has a fight song for it that's called the Victors. If you're an alumni of that school, you know what I mean, because it always says that you're the leaders of the West, right? And everybody that hears that song always wonders, what the hell is Michigan doing with the leaders of the West? You're not in the West. Well, actually, you were at one time. And here's the rest of the story. In 1689, Great Britain, or as it was starting to be called back then, it still hadn't officially united with Scotland, although it's been united under kings since James I in 1603. But anyway, had what they had their, can't call it their Civil War because that happened in 1645, but they did have a mini Civil War, but they called it the Glorious Revolution in 1688. What that means is James II was thrown out because he was Catholic and he wanted to make the England a Catholic state like his name, Scotland was. He was a Stuart. Well, he was thrown out, and they continued the Stuart line, but they went outside of England to get it. So they went over to the Dutch. William, Prince of Orange, and his wife Mary. Therefore, William and Mary College, remember that? Hee 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 hee. Well, they were asked to come in and take over the kingship, which after 1688, because of the Glorious Revolution, became just a kingship. The king had no other powers other than to open up Parliament and to be head of state. That's all that he had after that. All the powers of Henry VIII, Elizabeth I, Charles I, and Charles II went out the door. So, and by the way, the British Bill of Rights came into being, which, hence, 100 years later, would create the American Bill of Rights. But unfortunately, they did it like the 16th Amendment. That's another story. But back to the story. Well, in 1689, now that they were William III and Mary II, there was a little disagreement because remember the colonies were mismanaged from 1607 all the way up to that time. And King William says, hey, what's going on over there? You got all these people here in the coastline. And he didn't like the fact that his rival, Louis XIV, was having fun over there because he controlled Canada and he controlled the Louisiana Purchase and the West Territories. The West Territories are what you consider today Alabama, Mississippi, Tennessee, Kentucky, Indiana, Ohio, uh, Michigan, Minnesota, and parts of North and South Dakota, uh, Arkansas, and little parts of Arkansas there, but they were parts of the Northwest Territory. So William started a series of wars with Louis XIV. His successor, Queen Anne, continued them. And in 1714, when she died, the wars just ceased to exist. But Louis XV or XIV died on 1715. So there was a little quasi quo there. This is your land, this is my land, from California to New York Island. Oh no, that came out after. Okay, but you get the ditch. So they continued on harping at each other from 1715 to 1756. By that time, Louis XIII was in power, or Louis XV, pardon me, was in power, and he wanted the British little sliver that was the colonies. So there was a little war. It broke out in Europe, and it became a world war. Over here it was known as the French and Indian War, but it actually was the 7 Years' War, 1756 to 1763. When the French were defeated in 1763, they lost all possessions in North America. Canada became British, and the French that were there were still allowed to stay in one province, and that was the province of Quebec. So that's why you got those froggy Frenchies over there. But every other French had to go. Nova Scotia had some Frenchies there. They were called Acadians. Most of them ended up in the Louisiana Purchase territory over there in New Orleans, in the bayou, and called Cajuns. Yeah. That's why you like your étouffées, So that's where they ended up. Well, under the Treaty of 1763, the British got the Northwest Territory, and they just added on to their colonies. So North Carolina, Georgia, and Pennsylvania controlled, and Virginia controlled most of the Northwest Territory. Georgia went over to the Mississippi. That's why Alabama and Mississippi, oh, they're not there. They're still Georgia. That's why they hate Georgia with a passion when they play football, especially Alabama. Anyway, and the French ceded the Louisiana Purchase to Spain. Well, that irked the successor to Louis XV, Louis XVI, when he came into power after his grandfather's death in 1769. And when the Revolutionary War came up, he wanted an excuse to get in, and the Americans finally furnished him one. So he got in, defeated the British, but unfortunately in the Treaty of Paris of 1783, not 1763, like 20 years earlier, the British decided to do something that everybody thought was stupid, but it actually was interesting. They figured they could get the United States back, so they gave up the Northwest Territory to the Americans. And the Americans, they just drew their maps over there, and the states became all the way up to the Mississippi River. But there was people over there, because remember, you had guys like Squire Boone and Daniel Boone, who were leading people westward during this time period. Well, what happened after the Revolutionary War? The Americans needed money. So they opened it up didn't know about the Indians. They didn't care about them. They just opened up the Northwest Territory, and thus Kentucky became a state in 1791, Tennessee in 1796, and the Rocky Tonks, well, you know the rest of the story. Michigan waited till 1837, but Ohio in 1803, Indiana 1816, Alabama and Mississippi, they wanted their turn too, and therefore. So here's the rest of the story. Your Southern football season was born, irking up until this day, and our favorite alumni song was born. So there's hail to the victors, guys, and now you know the rest of the story.